Okay, everybody, here we are on week 7, and it's about 5 o'clock on Tuesday night, and we'll be doing the discussion. Let's show you what I'm going to be talking about here. I think we can go to this slide first, and we're going to be doing mostly twin screw work here. We're going to be doing a maneuvering and operation of twin screw vessels. Less is better, inboard, outboard turning. We're going to talk about propeller shrouds. We're talking about walking and crabbing, and so on and so forth. So let's just jump right into it. So rotation of propellers is the first one. So inboard turning and outboard turning, and okay, it's Wednesday, or coming up on Wednesday, and here is the lecture for week 7. We're going to be talking about just this upper part, which gets into twin screw vessel work, and we'll just jump right into it. So we got inboard turning and outboard turning. That's kind of the biggest thing we'll start talking about. Inboard turning is good for developing thrust, but look at this. What I got here, I got it here in quotes, over the top. So inboard turning over the top is good for developing extra thrust. Outboard turning over the top is considered to be more maneuverable by many captains and workboat captains. And I want to show you what I mean by that. So this is inboard turning, right? Over the top. The propellers are turning in opposition to each other, and over the top, that's inboard turning like that. This would be outboard turning. This would be outboard turning over the top. Right? Think about that. It's a way you have to describe it. Inboard or outboard, over the top. You could say, under the bottom, but over the top would be the best way. To do it. Now, the next thing we could talk about is something called shrouded propellers, and we're seeing a shrouded propeller here. These are sometimes called quart nozzles. That's more of a brand name. Shrouded propellers is the generic name. They do give us an increase of thrust. Actually, the Panagoet, based on its horsepower, would have about 12 or 13 tons of thrust. But because it has shrouded propellers, it actually has about 18 tons of thrust. You've been shown we can get significant more. We get significant more thrust out of a propeller by having it be shrouded. It focuses the prop wash against the rudders. We get some better turning effect. It's interesting to note that there's no transverse thrust created when we have a shrouded propeller. There's nothing there, either ahead or astern. And it's dangerous for lines or gear or people or debris in the water because it can suck it down into the forward edge of that shroud. So that could happen. Here's a view of a very overly simplified, just saying that they run very close to the edge. It's not real deep fore and aft, but there's an end view and a side view. Here's a vessel, which is the Dolphin 1 down in Fuchon, Louisiana, in a dry dock. Just look at the size of these here, and you can look at the size of the shrouded propellers. And obviously the rudders here, but look at the size of the person. On the other hand, here's the Panagoet with one of our crew, and standing here, and it's much smaller. The Panagoet is a nice little boat, but nothing compared to that one you saw. And but you can see it is. Notice the way the tips of the propellers have been modified to fit inside the shroud. Here's an example of a shrouded propeller on a single screw vessel, and you can see the different zincs on it for the corrosion control. I also noticed that it's just not a pipe. It's actually cast steel. It's not just fabricated out of a piece of pipe. Here's another one, which is a steerable nozzle, and you see the rudder is part of that, and you can see the rudder post going up, so it's a steerable nozzle, but again, single screw. Here's a view of the whole thing, which is, it shows you how this is the fore part, the shaft going up, and this is going astern, how it focuses the propeller shaft or the propeller wash, and it increases the velocity, much like any nozzle would do. And there's another view, sort of more of a cartoonish view. It's good to note, and there's been some data done to that here is a vessel which is a 26-meter trawler, and a single screw. A trawler would want a lot of bollard pull to pull the nets through the water. And notice that you get about a 30% increase in your bollard pull. But what's interesting is that's mostly at slow speed. So here's the without, here is with, but notice that it comes down and tapers down as you approach the hull speed. And this is thrust in tons. Now we don't know how much the horsepower was on this, but we can see that there is a difference. But it's mostly at slower speeds, 1, 2, 3, and then it starts to diminish at that 5, 6, 7, and we get up to the hull speed, 10 or 11 knots, and it's non-insignificant numbers. The next topic that we talk about is the separation of propellers, and that's the distance that the propeller shafts, as they exit the hull underwater, are off the center line. And I'll show you an example of what I mean. Now this affects the twisting motion when we oppose the engines. So we come ahead on one engine, we back on the other engine. It's going to affect that. Tugs that desire a high amount of maneuverability would want to have greater separation. So here's an image of a vessel with greater separation. Very, very far apart, very, very far apart, coming ahead with the force over here, coming astern with the force over here, and we would get a twisting around the pivot point. We go to the next one, and now we have a narrow separation. See, the force arrows are very close together, propellers are very close together. Let's just flip back to this one, far apart, close together. This would have a narrow separation, and this would result in less twisting effect when we oppose the engines. It wouldn't come around, it wouldn't twist, it wouldn't rotate as quickly. Just a few words about using both engines at a time or in opposition to twist a vessel. It does imply turning in one's own length. The engines are opposed, as we see. We can use a little bit of rudder here, but only the rudder which is being struck by the prop wash. In this case, this engine's coming ahead, so only the port rudder would actually have propeller wash coming out against it. And so that would be the key there. We have to be aware of excess cavitation as well. Let me show you something else. So we're going to go tabletop here. Now, what you think you can do when you come ahead on the port engine and astern on the starboard engine, you think you can just spin the vessel around like this. Well, theoretically, that you can do that, but you just can't say, well, 1,000 RPMs ahead and 1,000 RPMs astern. That's not the way it works. If you just go by the numbers and you don't look outside the window, you're probably going to get a rotation that has the ship moving forward and spinning, and it's kind of doing a pirouette right off the screen. Or maybe it's going the other way. But it's not doing it very eloquently. In order to actually pivot right in position, without moving ahead or astern, without moving anyway but just turning, you're constantly adjusting the throttle, the rudder, tweaking it a little bit, coming down 50, 75 RPMs, coming up on the other one. It's more of a motion like this. Now you see, it's very subtle is when I'm coming ahead. I'm coming at, but I'm trying. It won't be perfect, particularly if you have any kind of environmental factors out there. So just keep that in mind as you have a chance to do that. I'm going to ask Tim, Captain Parker, and Captain Leach to make sure that you get a chance to try to experience that. One of the things we do particularly on the Pentagoet and all twin screw vessels, back in the day I used to do part-time relief for the Maine State Ferry Service, and there were some pretty tense situations. Those are all twin screw vessels going out to the islands, and that was probably 10 or 15 years ago, and it was a fun job, and it was a good job, but very, 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 very interesting, and to see how all the different captains ran those boats. I don't know if you've ever been on the ferries, but they are twin screw, and they do a pretty good separation of propellers. Anyway, using one engine to control direction, it's good practice. It's what good ship handlers, good boat handlers do. You don't have to use both engines ahead. You don't have to always use them in opposition. You don't have to use both engines astern. It reduces power and speed during a maneuver. And you know how I feel about speed. Go slow, think ahead, be patient. You don't have to rush. It allows you more time to think. If you're only using one engine, you're going slower. You know, if you're down inside the boat basin, parking the tug at the dock, along the wharf there, along the floats, you're in a pretty tight position. You got enough to think about without having to operate two throttles. It truly is easier. You can always step up and use that second throttle if you really need it, but it's always good to start out with the least amount possible. And frankly, it's required by Captain Leach and Captain Parker and the rest of the training crew in the labs. A few words about the air controls. Be sure and allow enough time for the air to release before changing directions. If you're running ahead revolutions, if you're just clutched in ahead with one of those throttles, these are the throttles, the Mathers air control throttles, pneumatic, that are on the tug. If you come back into neutral and immediately in one fluid motion go astern, there's a chance that you'll lock that up and you'll be set, you'll be locked into your previous engine command, and that's not good. And you're going to learn how to do that. The lab instructors will talk to you about that. So let's say that you're coming ahead on the port engine, your starboard engine is stopped. What will be the net effect? Now think about that. You're stopped here, you've got some drag, you're coming ahead on the port engine, and of course it's going to look like this. The ship, the boat, is going to move ahead in that fashion. It's going to take a slow turn to starboard. On the other hand, if we're coming astern, if we stop the port, if we're coming astern, we're backing, rudder is midships, what's going to happen to us? It's going to look like this. So that may come intuitively to you, but it may take a little bit of thinking so that it really drives this point home. Now, lateral motion. Lateral motion employs, getting real, just sideways motion. Walking the vessel. Now, we use two terms for talking about lateral motion when we're driving the tugboat or any of these vessels. And you may have started to experience this even with the Bowden. We're coming into the town dock. We're getting pure lateral motion. You can either walk or you can crab. I want to talk about, and I said crab, like a little crustacean, crabbing, walking sideways along the bottom. I guess that's where the term comes from. So walking. Let's look at that. We're talking about something that looks just like this. We want to take this vessel and we want to move it laterally towards the berth. That's exactly what I mean. I'm using my engines, I'm using them in opposition, and I'm using my rudder to make that vessel just have pure lateral motion. It looks like this. We get that pure lateral motion. How do you do this? What do you do? What are the steps to do? Well, let's say we'll go step 1, step 2, step 3. There are 3 components to making a vessel walk. It's best. It's not impossible, but it's best if you have inboard turning propellers. It's not impossible if they're outboard turning over the top, but it's best if they're inboard turning. So you see we're set up, they're both inboard turning. Here's the throttle positions, they're both ahead. Now let's take number 1, transverse thrust. As we oppose the engines, the port engine's going ahead, right here, starboard engine's going astern. If we only think about transverse thrust, this propeller is generating, forget about the ahead and the astern. If just the side thrust, this propeller is turning, this propeller is now going in reverse, right? It was inboard turning, but now it's outboard, it's turning clockwise because it's pulling the stern power, and you're going to get your transverse thrust. Not a lot, but it's all part of the equation. And so transverse thrust is the first part. The second part is twisting. Now forget about the green arrow, forget about transverse thrust. Now just think about when you oppose the engines, when you come ahead on the port, come ahead on the port, astern on the starboard, you twist. Also, look where the pivot point. The pivot point is presumed to be just about between the thrust bearings, and you can think about kind of where the engines are, right where the force is applied to the hull. That's right between them. That's kind of where the pivot point when you are twisting with a twin screw vessel. Twisting or torque. Note the location of the pivot point. The bow goes to starboard. The stern, everything after the pivot point, goes to port. The third component is rudder effect. We've got some left rudder on here. Only the prop wash coming off this engine is coming back and striking the rudder surface, and that's kicking the stern, the red arrow. So all in all, transverse thrust, twisting, and rudder, it gets you the net effect. There's the net effect of what's happening. That's the way it's supposed to happen. That's the way it's supposed to happen. You want it to happen. You want it to come in like this. You want to be a perfectly, and you want to slow it down so you just come in and kiss that dock and everybody stands and says, wow, Captain, that was a beautiful thing. You want to know what the reality looks like when you're first trying to do this? Oh, I know if Parker or Leach are right there and they're just coaching you so hard that you're just an extension of them. You can probably do that. But if we turn it over to you, it's going to look more like this. You're going to start and you're going to start doing this. And then you'll do this. And then you'll end up coming back like this. And sometimes you'll even start going the other way. And then you'll be coming like this, and you'll be twisting and turning, and you'll be coming in like this. It's nothing like what we wanted it to be. And then finally you crash into the dock kind of hard down here. It wasn't just a perfect maneuver like you came in and just kissed it and everybody said, wow, isn't that a beautiful thing? No, you practice it. You just have to practice it. You'll get a feel for it. You are constantly adjusting the rudder. You're constantly adjusting the RPMs. Maybe just tweak it up, just maybe 25, 30, 40 RPMs more, astern, ahead. Your hands are always working. You're always observing. You're always looking ahead. You're always looking here, out this window. You're looking out the port side. You're looking astern. You're assessing what the motion of the vessel. The reality is it's probably more like this. It's not really one just perfect motion. It's kind of a slight wiggle waggle that comes just like that. That's the way it should look. I wish you the best with that as you learn to do it. It only comes from experience. So again, we're talking about lateral motion, and now we're talking about not walking, but something called crabbing. You know, you're thinking about a crab walking across the bottom of the seafloor, kind of that sideways motion, and so it's just a way of distinguishing it. And most of us on the main maritime crew, the waterfront, we all use that term walking using the engines and the rudder like I just described, and now we're going to do crabbing as we show here. You notice this vessel, maybe this is the dock, maybe this is the float, maybe this is the ship, maybe you just did this with the boat, maybe you were docking. And by the way, you know, I came down, I don't know if I said that or not, but I come down, I do watch you. I sit there at the dock, and sometimes you don't even see me, but I'm watching you as you do those with your lab instructors. And so it looks like you're having a lot of fun on the various boats down there, and particularly moving the Bowden around. That's a pretty good boat to practice on because there's quite a bit of weight there. And actually, sometimes it's a little bit easier to operate that boat than it is a small launch which is blown around by the wind. And it's just seems to be somewhat easier. And you seem to be all developing some pretty good skills. Now, so we're working the current here. These little vectors are the current, and we're trying to move this vessel, but you'll notice the vessel is tipped in a particular direction. Let's go to the tabletop. So here's our situation with the tabletop. Maybe we've got a 2-knot current moving this way, 2 knots. And flowing from the west. We've got our vessel here. This is our dock. Maybe this is the side of the ship. We bring the vessel, let's say it's the tug Pentagoet. We bring it up and we stem. Stemming the current means that we're directly in line with the current. We have no tendency. We're not tipped this way. We're not tipped this way. We just come up, and if we could match the speed of the current, 2 knots with our speed through the water, we would just hold our position. And that's probably the first step that we want to do. Once we get up there, we're gonna get the vessel and we're gonna tip it a little bit like this. And when we do, the current's gonna start to strike on the starboard side of the underwater hull, and we're gonna start very, very slowly. We'll start crabbing, and you'd be surprised how quickly this will come, and you'll be able to walk right in here Ooh, gotta watch out my words there. You'll be crab right in, right up against. Sometimes you might want to straighten her up as you get in here. Take a little bit of that angle off and get like this. Remember, the current is still flowing here as well. So if you're not careful, the current will get down in here and will push the bow off. Now that can be a positive thing. If we push the bow off, that can be a positive thing. That's good. We can use it to get away from the dock. So, you know, it's going to be best if you experience that with the lab. You can do that lots of different ways. You could be stern too. You have the current ebbing on the Bagaduce River. You could put the stern in like this, and you could crab in stern first. You could crab it in stern first like this. You could have the current coming from a flood current, and you could want to get away, and you could crab it all the way across the harbor. You could do this situation. It's very interesting how much you can do with just the force of the current, and you're going to certainly, in the next few weeks, you're going to get skilled on that. And as I said, I think you're starting to get into that as you parallel this lecture with what you're doing in lab. That is really good to hear. I'm going to start talking about pilots and piloting, and we're going to just have a little bit more. We're right here at about 21 minutes now. I want to go probably maybe 5 or 6 more minutes, and then I think we'll finish this up about pilots, because I think I want to do that in class. So we'll just go a little bit more. Stay with me here. You know, it's interesting. We'll talk about the pilots in Penobscot Bay, and there are 4 pilots, 4 members of the Pilot Association in Penobscot Bay. And what's interesting to me is that all 4 of them have sat in the same class that you've sat in. I've been doing this for a while, folks. Captain Jolinas, Captain Strong, Captain Smith, Captain Philbrook, who are now the pilots here in Penobscot Bay. And as you certainly, there's the logo and the image for the Penobscot Bay Pilot and River and Pilot Association, Bay and River Pilot Association. You see the different routes they come in from Monhegan up to Bush Channel, from Matinicus, from the east up the East Bay, or the West Bay of Islesboro, and all the way up the river if they need to. These pilots also handle the ships that come into Bar Harbor. That's part of their territory as well. You should know that the state of Maine has a pilot commission. It's represented by all the different aspects. It is a state group. It's a group that meets. It regulates the pilotage, ship pilotage here in the state of Maine. Ships coming into Penobscot Bay. Who's in charge of that? Well, the pilots are in charge of that, but who's in charge of the pilots? Yes, the Coast Guard. Yes, that's true, but also the Pilot Commission. So Dave, Skip, and Dave again, and Adam are all come under that. And some of those guys, some of those people are on the Pilot Commission themselves. Some of our alumni, some people in transportation, the rail and the freight and the truck drivers and the ports authorities in Bucksport. They're all a large group of people. They're all part of what happens for trade that connects to the water, rail and trucks and freight, oil tankers, and so on and so forth. You know what it looks like when a pilot comes on board. I suspect they have to climb up a ladder. I think you may have done this in seamanship. Sometimes they come aboard by helicopter. Some of our alumni out on the West Coast have done that. One particular alumni, I know that one of you actually met this alumni. The alumni is Captain Deborah Dempsey, and she has done this. Deborah was the first woman to graduate from Maine Maritime. We're very, very proud of her. So who met? Who was that person who met? I would believe that would be Olivia Mitchell. Remember that, Olivia? And I think you still think about that. I still think about that, and I can assure you that Captain Dempsey still is aware of you, because both she and Captain Ben Dixon have discussed that with me since then. How about that? Let's see. Talked about pilots. I think we're going to get real close on finishing up here, or maybe even on this slide. Docking master. What's the difference between a docking master and a pilot? They kind of look the same. They kind of talk the same. They show up and they work on the bridge, assisting, working with the captain. So here it is. Here's the short version. The pilot is purely charged. We think of a pilot as bringing the ship in from deep water into the harbor, or going out of the harbor out to deep water. That's the traditional role of a pilot. A docking master is a specialty pilot, not always used. Some ports around the country and around the world, they don't have this person. In Portland, Maine, in Boston, Massachusetts, in New York City, New York Harbor, Port of New York and New Jersey, they do use docking masters. Norfolk uses docking masters. So a docking master, specialty pilot, previously a tug captain, and here's an example. You see this name, Matt Patnode. He works for Boston Towing, and there's his tugboat, and sometimes he's on the tugboat as the tugboat captain, and sometimes he is up here on the bridge of the ship. This is an LNG ship coming in to Boston, and sometimes he is acting as that specialty additional pilot. And what a docking master does is just interact with the tugboat, because their specialty area in very, very tight situations is doing that just right. So all you VOT students, you want to be a pilot, you can do that, but you can also be a docking master. Those of you who start out on tugs, pretty cool. Matt came up through the tug ranks, has a high degree of experience using tugs and docking ships. Usually we get Matt up here to talk to us, but obviously we're not doing that this year. So maybe we can do something else. Wouldn't it be great if we just got him, to do a Zoom class? Would anybody like that? Would anybody like to have? Maybe we can. I'm not sure I want to tackle that. I'm not sure they want to tackle that, but maybe we can do something. Maybe it can be just a voice, that you could listen to for 5 or 10 minutes and just have them regale you with stories. So I'll work on that, and I think you might enjoy it. All right, I'm going to finish up there. We are going to go on. I'll show you the next slide, but we're going to come back. We're going to talk about voluntary and compulsory pilots. But for now, we'll end the day there. That's technically where we're ending the show. It's 28 minutes, and that's nice, a good time. And we'll see you later on. I just sent you. You should have seen a announcement and an email, so I kind of doubled up. I'm trying to. We're going to have to push back the exam this week. Thank you to the student. Thank you for the student who kind of reminded me that I think I'd lost track of the weeks, and I'm just not ready to do an exam this week. So we're going to push that back, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do all the exams online now, and I think that worked pretty well for us. I'm trusting everybody to be, of highest integrity, so on and so forth. But I also am a realist, and we are in extraordinary times, and so I'm just gonna do, I think, online testing, open book, no respondus, and they're going to be short quizzes. So kind of following that model of 10 or 15 questions, true or false, maybe a little bit of an essay, and so that's what's going to be coming up next week. And I sent an email out about that. And you may have got the email already, or maybe you'll watch this video first. But in either way, we should have made contact there. So my apologies for that. Good luck with the rest of the week, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.